Older Southern American English was a set of American English dialects of the southern United States, primarily spoken by white Americans before the American Civil War, moving towards a state of decline by the turn of the 19th century, further accelerated by World War II and again, finally, by the Civil Rights Movement. These dialects have since been largely replaced throughout the South by a more unified, younger Southern American English, notably recognized today by a highly unique vowel shift and certain other characteristics. Some features unique to older Southern U.S. English persist today, though typically in only very localized dialects or speakers. History. This dialects of American English evolved over a period of 400 years, primarily from older varieties of British English spoken by those who initially settled the area. Given that language is an entity that is constantly changing, the English of the colonists was quite different from any variety of English being spoken today. The colonists who initially settled the Tidewater area spoke a variety of early modern English, which itself was very varied. The older Southern dialects thus originated in large part from a mix of immigrants from the British Isles, who moved to the South in the 17th and 18th centuries, and the Creole or post-Creole speech of African slaves. Atlantic coast. The earliest English settlers of the colonies of Virginia and Massachusetts were mainly people from southern England. However, Virginia received more colonists from the English West Country, bringing with them a distinctive dialect and vocabulary. The Boston, Massachusetts, Norfolk, Virginia, and Charleston, South Carolina areas maintained strong commercial and cultural ties to England. Thus, the colonists and the descendants defined social class according to England's connotations. As the upper-class English dialect changed, the dialects of the upper-class Americans in these areas changed. Two examples of the R-dropping of the late 18th and early 19th century, resulting in the similar R-dropping found in Boston and parts of Virginia during the cultural Old South, as well as the trap-bath split, which came to define these same two areas but virtually no other region of the United States. Given that there are over 2.8 million people in the area, it is difficult to account for all variants of the local accent, which have largely been supplanted by newer Southern features. The area is home to several large military bases such as Naval Station Norfolk, Little Creek Amphibious Base, Oceana Naval Station, and Dam Neck Naval Base. Since a significant portion of the area's inhabitants are actually natives of other areas, there is constant linguistic exposure to other dialects. This exposure could be a reason why the younger generations do not exhibit most of the traditional features. Phonology. The phonologies of older Southern speech in the United States were diverse. The following pronunciation features were very generally characteristic of older Southern as a whole. Lack of yod dropping. Pairs like do and ju, or tune and tune, are often distinct in these dialects because words like jew, lute, new, etc. historically contained a diphthong similar to Jew. But Leboeuf et al. Report that the only Southern speakers who make a distinction today use a diphthong u in such words. They further report that speakers with the distinction are found primarily in North Carolina and northwest South Carolina, and in a corridor extending from Jackson to Tallahassee. For most of the South, this feature began disappearing after World War II. Yod coalescence. Words like dew are pronounced as Jew, and Tuesday as Tuesday. Distinction between W and WH in words like wine and wine, which and which. Distinction between pairs of words like horse and horse, rhoticity and non-rhoticity. The pronunciation of the R sound only before or between vowels, but not after vowels, is known as non-rhoticity, and was historically associated with the major plantation regions of the South, specifically the entire Piedmont and most of the South's Atlantic coast in a band going west towards the Mississippi River, as well as all of the Mississippi embayment and some of the western Gulf coastal plain. In older Southern rhotic accents which fully pronounce all historical R sounds, were rarer and primarily spoken in Appalachia, the eastern Gulf coastal plain, and the areas west of the Mississippi embayment. Palatalization of k ampigram before r, especially in the South along the Atlantic coast. The consonants k and when before the sound r are often pronounced with the tongue fronted towards the hard palate. Thus, for example, garden in older Southern is something like garden, and car like ire. This pronunciation feature was in decline by the late 1800s. Glide weakening of a, the gliding vowel in words like prize but less commonly in price, commonly has a weakened glide. This phenomenon has occurred throughout the South, except in the high tide and low country accents, continuing to be a defining feature of the modern Southern dialects. Mary distinction. Unlike most of the U.S. and modern Southern, older Southern does not merge the three following vowels before r and, although the three are now merging in modern Southern, the Mary class of words is still the least likely among Southerners to merge with the other two. Clear L between front vowels. Unlike modern Southern and general U.S. speeches, dark L sound, older Southern pronunciation has a clear L sound whenever L appeared between front vowels, as in the words silly, mealy, nelly, etc. Was, what, and if pronounced with the stressed word what, for example, rhymes with got. No happy tensing the final vowel of words like happy, silly, monkey, party, etc. are not tensed as they are in newer Southern and all other U.S. dialects, meaning that this vowel sounded like the of fit rather than the of feet. O, as in goat, toe, robe, etc., keeps a back starting place. This became an opener in the early 1900s. The modern fronted form started as far back as the 1800s in northeastern North Carolina, in the form, but only spread slowly, until accelerating after World War II. R pronounced as this feature is reported earliest in Virginia. Virginia, Piedmont and Tidewater, the major central and eastern regions of Virginia, excluding its eastern shore, once spoke in a way long associated with the upper or aristocratic plantation class in the Old South, often known as a Tidewater accent. Additional phonological features of this Atlantic Southern variety included non-rhoticity, trap bath split, pronunciation of the bath set of words in the trap bath split as different from the trap set of words as, a possibility of both variants of Canadian raising a pronounced as, but before a voiceless consonant, a pronounced as something like, but possibly before a voiceless consonant, e pronounced as in certain words, making bake sound like beck, and afraid like Fred. In Tidewater, Virginia particularly, some of the bath words pronounced farther back in mouth as are, as in bird, earth, flirt, etc., pronounced as, similar to modern London English. Broad A shifted towards a rounded, potentially causing, for example, palm and harm to rhyme. Down East, Pamlico, Outer Banks and Delmarva, Chesapeake. The Down East, Outer Banks coastal region of Carteret County, North Carolina, and adjacent Pamlico Sound, including Ocrasoke and Harkers Island, are known for additional features, some of which are still spoken today by generations-long residents of its unincorporated coastal and island communities, which have largely been geographically and economically likely isolated from the rest of North Carolina and the South since the first settlement by English-speaking Europeans. The same is true for the very similar dialect area of the Delmarva Peninsula and neighboring islands in the Chesapeake Bay, such as Tangier and Smith Island. These two regions historically share many common pronunciation features, sometimes collectively called a high-tide accent, including rhoticity, such as the vowel in the words high tide, retaining its glide and being pronounced beginning further back in the mouth, as or even rounded, often stereotyped as sounding like high tide, giving Pamlico Sound's residents the name high tiders. Is raised to, and most prominently, is raised to. This mirrors the second and third stages of the Southern vowel shift, despite this particular accent never participating in the very first stage of the shift, pronounced as, similar to modern Australian or London English. As in loud, town, scrounge, etc., pronounced with a fronted glide as, before a voiceless consonant. This same phoneme is as in chair, square, bear, etc. as card-chord mergers since at least the 1800s in the Delmarva Peninsula. Low Country. The Low Country, most famously centering on the cities of Charleston, South Carolina and Savannah, Georgia, once constituted its own entirely unique English dialect region. Traditionally often recognized as a Charleston accent, it included these additional features, most of which no longer exist today. Share merger towards non-rhoticity, a possibility of both variants of Canadian raising, pronounced as something like as but possibly before a voiceless consonant, pronounced as but before a voiceless consonant, pronounced as in a closed syllable in an open syllable, pronounced as in a closed syllable in an open syllable, pronounced as, pronounced as Appalachia due to the former isolation of some regions of the Appalachian South. The Appalachian accent may be difficult for some outsiders to understand. This dialect is also rhotic, meaning speakers pronounce R's wherever they appear in words, and sometimes when they do not. Because of the extensive length of the mountain chain, noticeable variation also exists within this subdialect. The Southern Appalachian dialect can be heard, as its name implies, in North Georgia, North Alabama, East Tennessee, Northwestern South Carolina, Western North Carolina, Eastern Kentucky, Southwestern Virginia, Western Maryland, and West Virginia. Southern Appalachian speech patterns, however, are not entirely confined to the mountain regions previously listed. Almost always, the common thread in the areas of the South where a rhotic version of the dialect is heard is a traceable line of descent from Scots or Scots-Irish ancestors amongst its speakers. The dialect is also not devoid of early influence from Welsh settlers, the dialect retaining the Welsh English tendency to pronounce words beginning with the letter H, as though the H were silent. For instance, humble often is rendered humble. Researchers have noted that the dialect retains a lot of vocabulary with roots in Scottish, Elizabethan English, owing to the makeup of the early European settlers to the area. Gulf Coast. Older speech of the Gulf Coast of the United States includes these features: rhoticity and non-rhoticity. Non-rhoticity historically occurred in the greater central sections of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, and in coastal Texas and some other coastal communities of the Gulf states. Rhoticity occurred in southern sections of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, as well as in northern Florida, western Louisiana, and eastern Texas. Trap-bath split. Pronunciation of the bath set of words in the trap-bath split as different from the trap set of words as Southern Louisiana, as well as some of southeast Texas, and coastal Mississippi, feature a number of dialects influenced by other languages beyond English. Most of southern Louisiana constitutes Acadiana, dominated for hundreds of years by monolingual speakers of Cajun French, which combines elements of Acadian French with other French and Spanish words. This French dialect is spoken by many of the older members of the Cajun ethnic group and is said to be dying out. A related language called Louisiana Creole also exists. New Orleans English was likely developing in the early 1900s, in large part due to dialect influence from New Yorker immigrants in New Orleans. Grammar and vocabulary. Zero copula in third person plural and second person. This is historically a consequence of R dropping, with the G, you're merging with you. You taller than Louise. They gonna leave today. Use of the circumfix a. In progressive tenses. He was a hootin' and a hollerin'. The wind was a howlin'. The use of like to mean nearly, like to merging into like to I like to had a heart attack. The use of the simple past infinitive versus present perfect infinitive. I like to had versus I like to have had. We were supposed to went versus we were supposed to have gone. Use of yonder as a locative in addition to its more widely attested use as an adjective. They done gathered a massive raspberries in the woods down yonder. Current projects. A project devised by Old Dominion University Assistant Professor Dr. Bridget Anderson entitled Tidewater Voices. Conversations in Southeastern Virginia was initiated in late 2008. In collecting oral histories from natives of the area. This study offers insight to not only specific history of the region, but also to linguistic phonetic variants native to the area as well. This linguistic survey is the first of its kind in nearly 40 years. The two variants being analyzed the most closely in this study are the a diphthongs in House of Brown and post-vocalic carlessnesses in f the, for f there.